Hello, this is Reindeer's Bees, and today I'm going to tell you why insulation is more important than ventilation. So first I'm going to talk about how it saves more food if you insulate. Second, I'm going to talk about how it affects moisture in hive during the winter time. And third, I'm going to talk about how it affects CO2 levels during the winter. So I think that in reality, ventilation is not as important as beekeepers have made it out to be in the last 20 years. I think insulation is a far better use of time insulating your hive than ventilating your hive. So the first part to this is how much they consume. I'm specifically talking about the winter time here, but this applies to the summer too. So when a hive is overwintering and they don't have brood, they keep the hive around 60 degrees. And the more effort they have to spend heating the hive, the more honey they burn. So they're eating that honey when they're heating the hive. So the more you have the hive insulated, then the less they have to heat the hive. And it also helps the bees within the hive because bees, it's really hard on the heater bees. Like different bees take turns being the heater bees inside the hive, but it's hard on them to produce heat for long periods of time and to do it more frequently. So you'll have more bees in the springtime if the bees have to do less heating. They'll be more healthy and more able to transition into the springtime. So, the more insulation they have, the less food they have to eat, which means you have to feed them less in the fall or they need less honey to make it through the winter, which is just an advantage. So the most feasible way to implement this insulation is to do 2-inch insulation, foam insulation on the top of the hive. You always want to have, if you're going to insulate the sides, which you can do and probably would help to an extent, you want to insulate the top more than you insulate the sides. Because, and this gets into the moisture part, which I'll switch into in a minute, but you want to have more insulation on the top than on the sides. You can insulate the sides. That will help, not as much as you insulating the top of the hive. Moisture. So one of the big reasons that you're told you need to ventilate your hive is that the moisture is going to fall down on the bees during the winter time and kill them. So this could happen in certain circumstances, but it's often not why people's bees die. It's just that when a bee dies in a hive, it sucks up all the moisture around them, and so they look really wet when the beekeeper comes in to look. So if you want to avoid any risk of this happening, all you have to do is insulate the top of the hive and not have an upper vent. Because the cold from the lid of the hive will not meet the rising water vapor coming up if you have 2 inches of insulation in between. The insulation is going to hold in the heat from the colony below, and it's not going to be really cold. The foam in between, it holds the heat from the hive from down below, helps them eat less food, but what it also does is it keeps the bees from having moisture dripping on them, because what creates condensation is warm water vapor meeting cold surface, and the 2-inch foam won't be a cold surface. It will just hold in the heat from below. So, and it's important because the bees need moisture during the winter. This is often overlooked by beekeepers, is bees actually need a fair amount of moisture during the winter time because they don't really get water any other way. They can't fly out, everything's frozen and it's too cold for them to fly. And then any excess moisture that the bees don't want to drink will condense on the side of the hives because that is cold, and then go down to the bottom and run out the front of the hive. So any issues with moisture all the moisture will run down the hive. Any of it that the bees don't need will be properly discarded of. And that's why ideally you'd want your hive to have a slightly front tilt to the front. That way any water that condenses on the sidewalls can run down the hive. So the reason why I think that this insulation is much better than ventilation is, think about the alternative to insulating the hive. It's often to have an upper vent. And said upper vent lets out tons of heat with the moisture. So you're losing tons of heat, making it so your bees have to eat a lot more food. And since your bees have to eat a lot more food, you may have to feed them on top of the frames, which only exacerbates the moisture problem. The bees need moisture during the wintertime. It's an important part of them being able to overwinter. So not only are you letting all that moisture go out your inner cover hole, you're also, when you put that sugar on, it's sucking up all the moisture into the hive, into the sugar, or brick, whatever kind of dry feed you put on top of the hive during the winter. And so that's taking away the moisture that the hive may need, and also making it so it's really hard for the bees to eat your sugar. So if you get rid of that upper entrance and just insulate, it can lead to a lot better outcomes. Part 3, why insulation is important with CO2 use for the bees during wintertime. So bees can take up to 90,000 parts per million of CO2. This information was from Etienne Tardif's presentation at the Bee Expo this January. I'll link his channel above. It's great. So much information. Literally anything you could ever want to know about insulation, ventilation, temperature data, humidity, CO2, he's got it all. So check his channel out. I'll link it below. You can check it out. So he said he's found that bees can take 90,000 parts per million of CO2. And to give you context, a normal human house has roughly 400 to 1,000 parts per million of CO2. So, 90 to 180 times more CO2 in a beehive than in a human house. And that would easily kill a human very quickly. So the bees are able to take an insane amount of CO2. And that's one of the things that beekeepers have been warning each other about. They're like, if there's too much CO2 in your hive and they can't vent, it's going to kill them. But in reality, it's not really a huge issue for them. They can take a lot of CO2, and having a lot of CO2 even has possible benefits as well. In his presentation, he found that when those hives have tons of CO2 and they're undisturbed, so they have no reason to vent it, they consume way less food. He said in a double deep, the bees only consume 30 to 40 pounds of food during the entire winter. And his winter lasts from like October to May. So how does he do that? It's because his hives are insulated. That helps, one. But two, when he has no upper vent, and so the CO2 builds up in the hive, and it sends the bees into kind of like a sleepy state. And in this sleepy state, the bees consume way less food. It slows down their metabolism. So by letting all the CO2 go out the top, you're forgoing that normal process that bees have used for thousands of years to overwinter. So that CO2 can be a massive benefit to your colony. And they don't actually vent the CO2. He noticed that they only vent it once the brood rearing starts. So whenever your brood rearing starts, that's when they send down the levels of CO2. So I could see how that could potentially be an issue during the wintertime if their entrance is blocked and they can't vent when they want to start brood rearing. But I think you can figure out a way so that their entrance will be appropriate so they can fly. If they're starting to brood rear, then it shouldn't be too cold that they won't be able to fly, or not that they won't be able to fly, but fan the entrance. So I think CO2 can be a massive benefit to bees. Ventilation doesn't kill bees, and I'm not going to ever say that it does. I just don't know if it's the ideal thing as beekeepers we can do to keep our bees is to ventilate them. I think that we're closer and better off trying to insulate them than ventilate them. People have ventilated for so many years and their bees survive because it turns out bees are really good at making it through cold weather during the wintertime. That's what they developed to do in Europe and Asia. So they're pretty good at it no matter what silly things that we do as beekeepers. It doesn't matter a whole lot. But I would urge you to look into the information, especially on Etienne's channel, and do your own research and really look into if ventilation is helping your beehives or not. I think insulation is the way to go. My plan is to build tops with at least 1, if not 2-inch insulation in all of them. And that way they can year-round have that, and then also no upper entrance. We'll see how it goes, and I'll keep you updated as we go. Hope you enjoy. See you in the next one.